We often just take it completely for granted, don't we? Clean, affordable water, it just flows from our taps whenever we need it. But what if that wasn't your reality? What if just getting safe drinking water came with this hidden price tag, a kind of invisible burden that most of us, we never even think about? So in this deep dive, we're going to sort of pull back the curtain on the true costs, the often invisible ones that some people face just to get water, even when on paper it looks like it's available. We're focusing on a really fascinating research paper that looks closely at Chennai, India, a huge metropolitan area. And it introduces this powerful idea called coping costs.
Yeah, and this Chennai story, it really reflects a much bigger global picture. I mean, the international community has been setting goals for water access for decades now. You go back to 2000, we had the Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. And the aim then was to have the proportion of people without sustainable access to safe drinking water. And by 2015, there was significant progress. Billions gained access in some form. But then things evolved quite crucially. Since 2015, we've had the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. And SDG 6.1, well, it takes things a vital step further. It's not just about access anymore. The goal now is universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all. And that immediately brings up a really interesting question, doesn't it? How do we actually measure that affordability in, real tangible terms?
That's such a critical shift, moving beyond just, can you physically get to water? Okay, can you actually afford it? So if the water bill itself doesn't tell the whole story, how do we measure that true cost? And this is exactly where this idea of coping costs comes in. Think of them as all the expenses, both tangible, like money spent, and intangible, like time lost, that households basically have to incur when their main water supply is erratic or unsafe or just not enough. These costs, they become this vital real-world measure of affordability. They show the true burden, often hidden, that falls right onto households when the official system, well, it falls short. It's not just the bill, it's everything else.
Exactly. And what's really interesting here from an economics perspective is that this coping cost approach, it's rooted in something called revealed preferences. So instead of asking people hypothetical questions, what would you pay for better water? It looks at what people actually do. What actions do they take to get clean water? It's about observing their defensive behaviors in everyday life. So for instance, if your tap water is unreliable, maybe you spend money on bottled water. That's a coping cost. Or you might spend hours collecting water from a public tanker truck. That time has a cost. Or you might invest in a filter or even dig your own well. These are all coping strategies, and every single one comes with a cost, time, money, effort.
Right. So these strategies can look really different depending on the situation.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about things like, spending hours waiting in line for a water tanker, or the direct cash expense of buying those big cans of drinking water. Or maybe it's the upfront investment and then the ongoing upkeep for a water filter, or even drilling a private bore well. It's this whole spectrum of effort just to secure something so basic.
Okay, so let's make this concrete. Let's zoom in on the case study. Chennai, this major city in India. Now, Chennai has a public water supply, right? But residents there still face really significant challenges getting water. The main provider is called CMWSSB, the Chennai Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewerage Board. They're supposed to supply water, but the study found it only provides about 87 liters per person per day.
Which is quite a bit less than the 120 liters that's generally seen as, necessary for a big city like that.
And it gets tougher. Even for the, 89% of people who actually have a piped connection to their home, the access is intermittent. On average, water only flows for about 5 hours a day.
Just 5 hours? Yeah.
Imagine trying to manage that. It must be a massive logistical challenge just for daily life. Cooking, cleaning, everything.
Absolutely. And this situation, this insufficient and unreliable supply, it forces households to get creative, you could say. They have to adopt all sorts of strategies beyond just hoping the tap works. The researchers held focus groups, and people talked about relying on collecting water from public taps or tankers, needing large tanks to store water when it is available, treating the water themselves to make it safe, buying bottled water, of course, and even pumping water from their own private bore wells if they can afford to install one. It's like this complex patchwork system households have to build and manage themselves day in, day out.
Wow. It really does sound like a daily puzzle just to meet basic water needs. So the study actually broke these actions down, right? They identified specific types of coping behaviors.
That's right. They categorized them into 5 main types based on what people were doing in Chennai. There's collecting water, which mainly involves time and effort. There's pumping water, usually from private wells. Then treating water to improve its quality. Storing water because the supply isn't constant. And finally, purchasing water, whether it's from cans or paying fees.
Okay, collecting, pumping, treating, storing, purchasing. Got it. So what do all these invisible efforts actually add up to financially? What did the study find in Chennai?
Well, the numbers are quite striking. On average, the monthly coping costs were around 553 Indian rupees for households that did have a piped connection. But for those without a piped connection, it was higher, about 658 rupees per month.
So an overall average of what, 629 rupees a month just for coping?
Exactly, around 629 rupees.
That's, I mean, for many families, that's like getting hit with an extra unexpected utility bill every single month.
Yeah.
Just to manage basic water access.
It is, and when you break down those costs, each part tells a really important story. Let's start with collection costs. For households without a piped connection, this is a massive burden. It averaged 146 rupees a month, making up 22%, almost a quarter of their total coping costs.
Wow.
For households with pipes, it was much, much lower, only about 8 rupees a month, less than 2%. So that piped connection makes a huge difference there.
And it's not just the money, right? You mentioned the time earlier.
Yeah. Oh, the time factor is absolutely critical. Get this. Some households reported spending up to 2,250 minutes per month collecting water.
Wait, 2,250 minutes. That's 37 and a half hours a month.
37 and a half hours, yes, just collecting water. And remember, international guidelines often suggest collection time, including queuing, should ideally be under 30 minutes total trip time from basic sources.
37 hours versus 30 minutes. That's staggering. That's almost a full-time job just fetching water. Think about the lost opportunities, earning money, education, childcare.
It's a profound opportunity cost, exactly.
Okay, so that's collection. What about the direct money spent? The purchase costs.
Right, purchase costs. This includes a few things. For those with piped connections, there are fixed charges, maybe around 100 rupees a month. But a really big part, for many, is buying purified water in those large cans for drinking. The average was about 12 cans a month, and each can costs around 30 rupees. Non-piped households might also pay small fees, maybe informal ones, when they collect from public taps or tankers. So adding it all up, the average purchase cost came out to about 299 rupees for piped households and 230 rupees for non-piped households per month.
Interesting that it's slightly higher for piped households there. Maybe they substitute buying cans for the unreliability of the tap.
That could be part of it, yes. They might rely more heavily on purchased cans for drinking quality, while non-piped households might use collected water for more purposes.
Okay, what's next? Pumping.
Yes, pumping costs. This applies to households that have invested in their own bore wells, often for convenience or better reliability. This cost isn't just the electricity to run the pump each month. The study cleverly included the amortized cost of installing the well, spreading that big upfront expense over its expected 15-year lifespan, plus the monthly operating and maintenance costs. On average, this came to about 127 rupees for piped households and 154 rupees for non-piped ones who had wells.
So even some piped households invest in wells too. That says a lot about the public supply's reliability.
It does. Then you have treatment costs. People use various methods, right? Boiling is common, using simple manual filters, or sometimes investing in electric RO or UV filters. So these costs include things like the estimated fuel cost for boiling or the price of buying and replacing filter cartridges, plus any maintenance. These costs were lower on average, around 29 rupees for piped and 43 rupees for non-piped household.
And people's perception matters here, you said.
Very much so. If people perceive the water quality to be poor, even if it's not scientifically confirmed sometimes, they're more likely to invest in treatment. Trust is a big factor.
Makes sense. And the last category was storage.
Right, storage costs. Because the supply is so intermittent, only those few hours a day, many households need storage, often large overhead tanks on the roof. So the study calculated the amortized cost of installing these tanks, assuming maybe a 30-year lifespan, and also included the cost of smaller pots and utensils used for water storage inside the home. This averaged about 89 rupees for piped households and 85 rupees for non-piped. Pretty similar between the two groups.
Okay, so collection, purchase, pumping, treatment, storage.
Yeah.
That adds up. But there was something else too, wasn't there? A much grimmer cost.
Yes. Beyond all those direct coping costs, the study also documented a really sobering consequence. They found 30 households in their sample, which isn't insignificant, who reported actual sickness and even hospitalization due to suspected waterborne diseases. For these households, the average additional monthly cost related to sickness was 512 rupees.
Wow, on top of everything else.
Yes. And that 512 rupees includes not just the direct medical bills and medicine costs, but also the estimated value of lost working days for the sick person or caregivers. It's a substantial hidden burden.
That really drives home the human cost of unsafe or unreliable water. It's not just inconvenient, it's dangerous and expensive.
Precisely. And if we step back and connect this to the bigger picture of affordability, one of the most critical findings in the study, maybe the real aha moment, is how these coping costs vary with household income.
Okay, how do they break down?
Well, the difference is it's stark. For high-income households in the study, these coping costs represented maybe about 1% of their total income. Manageable, you could say. But for low-income households, those earning less than 10,000 rupees per month, which is roughly maybe 120, 130 US dollars at the time, these same coping costs could eat up as much as 15%, 15% of their monthly income.
15%. Just for water coping strategies.
15%. It reveals this deeply regressive situation where the financial burden falls incredibly heavily on those who can least afford it.
That is absolutely crushing. I mean, 15% of your income. Think what that means for food, for rent, for education, for everything else. And you mentioned earlier that for the poor, collection and purchase were the big ones.
That's right. For these low-income households, the costs associated with just collecting water, mainly the time value, and purchasing water made up a massive 65% of their total coping costs. Those two activities dominate their burden.
It's really eye-opening. And there's that benchmark people talk about, isn't there? The 5% rule.
Yes, exactly. There's a common proposal, often cited by international organizations, that total household expenditure on water and sanitation services shouldn't really exceed 5% of the household income to be considered affordable.
Well, based on these numbers from Chennai, the low-income households are blowing way past that 5% mark. They're spending triple that just on coping, let alone regular water bills if they even have them.
They are significantly exceeding that affordability threshold, yes. It highlights a major gap between the SDG goal and the reality on the ground for the most vulnerable. And another important nuance, while it's true that total coping costs do tend to increase a bit with income overall because wealthier households simply have more resources to spend on things like fancy filters or bigger storage tanks.
Right, they can afford more elaborate coping mechanisms.
Exactly. But even so, the study found that non-piped households consistently incurred higher total coping costs than piped households at every income level.
Ah, okay. So having that basic pipe connection still provides a fundamental advantage in reducing the overall burden, regardless of income.
It underscores the importance of that basic infrastructure, definitely.
So pulling this together, what did the study find were the main factors driving these costs? They used some statistical analysis, right?
They did, yes. They used regression analysis to see which household characteristics were significantly correlated with higher or lower coping costs. And several factors stood out. First, as we just discussed, income. It was positively related to total coping costs. Wealthier families generally spent more in absolute terms on coping because they could afford more strategies.
Okay.
Second, having a piped connection. This was negatively related to total coping costs. So having that connection significantly reduced the overall burden, as we saw.
Makes sense.
Third, the perception of contamination. Households that believed their water was contaminated or saw it as a serious problem understandably incurred higher coping costs, mostly through investing more in treatment.
So public trust and water quality information are key there.
Absolutely. Fourth, the education level of the household head showed a positive link. Households where the head was more educated tended to spend slightly more on coping. The thinking is they might be more aware of the health risks and benefits of clean water and thus more willing to invest. Fifth, age also showed a positive association. Older households tended to spend a bit more, perhaps prioritizing water quality due to greater health concerns.
Okay.
And finally, family size. This had a positive effect, which seems intuitive. Larger families just need more water, leading to greater investment in collection, purchasing, storage, treatment, pretty much across the board.
Right. More mouths to feed, more water needed.
Yeah.
Okay, so income, piped connection, perception of quality, education, age, and family size all play a role in shaping these coping costs. So let's try to wrap this up. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into Chennai's water situation and these coping costs?
Well, I think the clearest takeaway is that for many communities like Chennai, we're still quite far from achieving that SDG 6.1 goal of truly safe and affordable water for all.
Yeah, the reality seems quite different.
The reality is often an unreliable, insufficient supply, concerns about quality, and as a direct result, households are forced to shoulder this substantial burden. Financial, yes, but also in terms of time and health impacts just to get by, just to access a fundamental necessity.
It really is a hidden burden for millions.
Uh-huh.
So what are the implications for policy then? What needs to happen?
The policy implications seem pretty clear from the results. There's a strong implication of a need for interventions focused squarely on enhancing affordability, especially for lower income groups. And based on the cost breakdown, key levers would be policies aimed at drastically reducing that collection time burden.
That 37 hours.
Exactly. Reducing that time cost and significantly increasing the reliability and potentially the quality of the main water supply. Ideally, this points towards expanding and improving piped water connections, making them more reliable and trustworthy, as that seems to be the most direct way to reduce the overall coping burden.
Makes sense. Improve the core service so people don't have to rely so much on these costly backup strategies. All right, so as we finish up, here's something for you, our listeners, to maybe think about. We've talked a lot about the costs of water coping today, but consider the deep connections between water and energy. Pumping water needs energy, treating water often needs energy, even collecting water might involve transport that uses energy. As energy costs potentially continue to climb around the world, how might that further impact these already high coping costs for households? It could add yet another layer of challenge onto an already complex and difficult situation, something to ponder.